the so what is a big question I ask. When I'm presented with data from one of our team members, when they're maybe making a report on something, and I'm given numbers, my number one question is going to be, so what? What does this mean? And I think that it's easy to give data and to present data, but to not have the story behind it and the meaning behind it leaves it not as valuable for anyone on the team.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Growth League podcast. I am your host, of course, Caleb Clark, and I'm here with a special guest, Alison Osborne, the Director of Growth Marketing at Quill. Welcome, Alison. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Exciting.
So before we get into it, I want to introduce you to our listeners a little bit, and then I'll give you a chance to fill in some blanks and tell us more about yourself. So Alison is the Director of Growth Marketing at Quill, which is an award-winning branded podcast agency. And she is the co-host of a podcast analytics and CoHost, which is a podcast analytics and audience insights tool. I'm going to start again, all right?
No worries.
Alison Osborne is the Director of Growth Marketing at Quill Inc., an award-winning branded podcast agency and co-host a podcast analytics and audience insights tool. Previously, she co-founded Origins Media House, a boutique branded podcast agency based in Toronto, which was acquired by Quill in 2020 and held various marketing positions at B2B and B2C startups in Toronto. Her work has been featured in publications like, and bear with me here, Bay Street Bull, Spiceworks, Bloomberg, Better Marketing, Notable Life, and Forbes. She's also received a nomination for WICMA's Rising Star and has contributed to Quill's many accolades, including the Best Small Business Award by Canadian SME, Voive, how do you spell that?
Voive.
Voive Clicos Bold Future Award and WICMA's Pivot Award. She has built the marketing departments for both Quill and CoHost from the ground up, and along the way has become hyper-focused on how to merge creativity with data to build a brand. And she just recently bought a brand new Elantra car.
Which is very exciting. The biggest win out of that whole bio.
Totally. We're going to learn a lot about you and a lot about Quill. Quill is an industry-leading podcast production agency working with some of the largest brands in North America and reaching a global audience for their clients. They produce content that's results-oriented, engaging, and of course, entertaining, just like the Growth League podcast. So, Alison, I'm curious, outside of all that, what fills your cup? What do you do on the side? What's the secret passion or hobby you have that makes you you?
Oh, interesting. I would say that definitely wellness, fitness, that's a big side passion for me. I think that for really anyone working in business startups, having some sort of release of some of the stress and just workload throughout the day is important. So for me, that's where that lives, is in the gym. Biking is a big passion for me. I live in the Okanagan in British Columbia, so really getting outside, hiking, paddleboarding, anything to stay active is where my passion lies.
If you're in Kelowna, you're definitely not spending too much time in the gym based on the surroundings available to you.
Yes, yeah. I mean, looking out at the mountains is pretty tempting to go there instead.
Totally. What's your preferred form of training? Are you a long distance runner? Are you Olympic lifter? What's your thing?
I like lifting. I like bodybuilding. Endurance, not my thing. I would like to get better at it, but not my thing to date.
Tell us a bit more about Quill and specifically through the lens of what problems do you guys solve for whom, and why do you believe you're the best suited to solve those problems?
Yeah, I think that when we talk to brands and when we're working with brands, they're typically coming to us because their goal is maybe related to increasing credibility, thought leadership, awareness, even lead generation, partnership building, and they're looking for maybe a more creative medium to achieve this.
Mhm.
versus the traditional channels that they're working off of, like social media, newsletters, blog writing, and everything like that too. And what our biggest focus is for them, and where I think that podcasts are unique, is that they really have the ability to bring a more human element to a brand. And when we're looking at larger corporate companies, it's hard to see the human side to them sometimes. They're seen as these very large enterprises, and no one really knows the faces behind them, and the true messaging behind them either. But with a podcast, you're building a relationship with your audience, and specifically the host is building a relationship with your audience. And I think that it has the ability to, like I said, bring that more human side to the company. And along with that, maybe even shift brand perception for your audience and change how the industry sees your company, since you are also holding this audience's attention for sometimes upwards of 45 minutes, which is an amazing amount of time to be speaking to your target audience, and not always just obviously selling them on your company, but the overall podcast is promoting your values and your mission and your knowledge. And I think that's a very powerful medium for marketers and for teams to be able to leverage.
Totally. When you work with organizations, how does the relationship initially get started? Are organizations to the point where they're reaching out actively to you, or are you still trying to sort of nurture and educate and make them understand where podcast fits in their mix? Is it a combination of both, or how does that get generated for you?
Yeah, I would say that it's been very interesting because I've been working in branded podcasts for about 6 years now. And when I first started, it was really focused on that education piece. I would say that we worked in branded podcasts, and a brand would ask to be featured on our podcast. They didn't understand that we were creating a medium for them, similar to how a video production agency would work. So it was really focused on that education piece and teaching them how podcasts were done, how they could use podcasts in their marketing strategy. But over the years, and I think anyone in marketing has seen that shift in audio and has seen that branded podcasts have become a large discussion for a lot of brands.
Right.
And we are now at the point where brands are coming to us knowing that they want a podcast. Sometimes they know where it fits in their marketing strategy. Sometimes they don't. They come to us because they've seen that a lot of other companies have podcasts, so they want to get in on that too. And
Right.
then that's our job to find where it fits best for them, because we're not going to create a podcast for the sake of creating a podcast. Right. We're going to create a podcast that has a goal for you, whether, again, that is on that thought leadership credibility front, it's on the building partnerships front, it's on shifting brand perception, again, lead generation. So whatever that key goal is, then we'll sort of work from there. But it's definitely changed that we don't need to emphasize education as much, since a lot of companies already know.
That makes sense. What would you say to the organizations out there that definitely have a compelling story to tell and message to give, but they're hindered by a belief that maybe there's too many podcasts out there, or that, maybe their story isn't as, intriguing as they may think? What are some of the hurdles that you see that you need to get people over, to weave this into their mix?
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely that argument but there's so many podcasts out there. And our response is, think about how many blogs are out there.
Mhm.
Think about how many YouTube channels are out there, newsletters that are out there. There are so many more of those mediums, yet people are still launching new ones every day that are wildly successful. And the same is for podcasts. Podcasts are still a relatively young medium, especially for branded podcasts. So I think what it comes down to is really figuring out, if you have that compelling brand story, how can you share it with your audience in a unique way? Right. And what we like to do with our clients is we build some sort of competitor matrix. And what this looks like is, if we know the category that you're going to be playing in, we know who you're trying to target and who you want your listeners to be, then we'll create a list of maybe like 5 other podcasts within that space and break down similarities, break down what we like about them, what we don't like about them, what the hosts are like, what the topics are like, and everything like that. And that sort of shapes how we're going to look at the format, the hosts, the types of guests, and the topics, and even the length and the cadence
Right.
for this client's podcast. Maybe in this sector, we find that there's a lot of interview podcasts. Okay, let's try doing something different. Maybe we
Right.
take a more journalistic approach. Maybe you even try a narrative storytelling approach, and it's completely different than what a lot of other branded podcasts are doing, and you test out that strategy. So we let that lead the way of the initial discussions of how we're going to strategize and build this podcast.
Yeah.
But I think out there for any brands that have a story to tell, my biggest piece of advice is just to tell it. Don't wait, and don't think that there's not space for you. Find the right partners and resources to help you bring it to life and create it and make it something unique for your audience.
Yeah. What are some of the errors that you guys see brands making that are, brands that are putting a podcast together? What are 4 or 5 big errors or things to stay away from as a cheat sheet guide, if you will?
Thinking that you need to sell your podcast sell your brand throughout the entire podcast.
Yeah.
No one wants to listen to a 30-minute infomercial. That is horrible. So I think it can be a little uncomfy sometimes to have a whole marketing channel that you're not really speaking about your brand on, but understand that with a branded podcast, you are, no matter what, sharing and advertising your brand the entire time, even if you're not directly speaking about your company.
Right.
And a question that we like to ask our clients and anyone that we talk to about branded podcasts is, when you're creating your show, ask yourself, would I listen to this? And it's an easy question, but not one that a lot of people ask themselves. And I think you'd be shocked to sit back and think, no, I wouldn't listen to this, because this is more about the brand versus the listener. And that's what you need to focus on, is the listener, not the brand. So asking yourself, will I listen to this? And then going from there can fix a lot of those initial issues.
Yeah.
I would also say that, like I mentioned earlier, setting a goal is so important for your podcast. There is a bit of a hype around podcasts right now, and people creating them for the sake of creating a podcast because your competitors have one, because it's really a hot topic in the marketing space. But I think if you don't have that goal there, then you don't know what metrics to look at to know whether or not it's performing for you. And depending on the resources and agencies that you're working with, it can be a relatively large investment. So being able to justify the cost of a podcast moving forward without knowing whether or not it's working for your brand is going to get very challenging. So I think that is something that we lay out with all of our clients before we even get started, is what goals are we looking at? So we know what metrics to look at, so we know how to understand if it's performing for your brand or not. And then I would also say consistency and patience. So podcasts are a very consistent medium. You need to stay consistent with your cadence of publication, whether that's weekly, bi-weekly, whatever cadence you choose. Consistency is key. Obviously, if you're doing seasonal, that's okay. You don't need to be publishing year round, but still stay consistent. You can't run one season and expect to have insane growth. That's just not how it works. Right. Even if you have an audience as a brand on social media or on your newsletter or on your blogs, you can't promise that audience is going to move over to audio. Really, the only type of overnight successes we see with podcasts is if you are a celebrity, and sadly, many of us are not. So it doesn't work that way. And you need to understand that it's a marathon and not a sprint.
But Alison, I want to go viral.
I know, we all do.
Well, I mean, talking about understanding your audience and building this content with the listener in mind, I know that our listeners are curious about different blueprints and approaches and experience sharing that other marketing leaders across industry have on very common topics that come up a lot. So I want to ask you a little bit about you from the lens of, as a professional marketing marketer and marketing leader. Right now, what would you distill your number one mandate to be for both you and your team as it relates to the growth and the capture of new market share for Quill?
Yeah, I would say that, I guess I'll answer it in sort of how I see just my job to date.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to think of it as is I work to understand our audience, understand what channels they live on, build strategies for both Quill and CoHost to live on those channels as well,
Right.
deploy those strategies, and then measure whether or not they work for us. And once we know that they do, I then work to bring in the right team members, vendors, or whatever stakeholders and resources we need to then take that channel and continue to run with it, optimize it, grow it. And that's sort of when I take that step back and let them move forward with it from there. And
Right.
then that is how I like to build all the different channels that we're working on. And I see myself as taking a more step back view of measuring the performance of all those channels, but not being as much in the thick of it and the weeds of it. I like to bring in our team members to perform more of those tasks.
Yeah. How is your team constructed currently? Combination of internal, external, whatever that may be.
Yeah, so we do have internal marketing team employees that obviously work at both Quill and CoHost. Our entire marketing department does work with both brands. So it's sort of an interesting space for our team because we work on the agency side and have to have knowledge on the agency side, but then also on the product side and have to have knowledge on the product side. So we have a very agile team that I'm fortunate to have. And then we also source outside vendors, so other agencies that we'll bring on for areas like paid advertising. And then we also work with various freelancers that we'll bring in for maybe smaller content writing roles or anything like that too. So it's a mix of internal employees, vendors, freelancers,
and two brands.
And two brands.
Well, it takes a special leader and a strong leader to be able to manage all of that. Putting you on the spot a little bit, what would you say your 1 to 2 superpowers are that you leverage in fulfilling your mandate and managing your team as a leader, as a marketer? What are your superpowers?
I think curiosity and questioning is top for me. I think I'm good at questioning why something is working, why it's not working, and how we can make it better. I think that sometimes with startups, and even I've felt this too, speed overcomes quality at points. And I think I'm good at taking a step back and saying, no, let's ask more questions. Let's see how we can do better. Let's see how we can grow more and not just leave it as is. And I would say that another one of mine is on the storytelling front when it comes to data that I really like to use with our team as well. So the so what is a big question I ask. When I'm presented with data from one of our team members, when they're maybe making a report on something, and I'm given numbers, my number one question is going to be, so what? What does this mean? And I think that it's easy to give data and to present data, but to not have the story behind it and the meaning behind it leaves it not as valuable for anyone on the team. So I think encouraging our team to think more deeply about why something is working, why something isn't working, and how we can do better with questions like that. So what, with that data storytelling is where I like to see my superpowers lie and where I like to try to build up our team members. And then I would also say I'm a pretty good, and I know everyone says you're not supposed to multitask, but I like to think I'm a pretty good multitasker.
Only few people can do that well. So
Yeah.
if you can do it, own it. But to your point about questions, how incredible is it that we just time and time again find the truth or the answer or the real meaning at the end of a series of good questions, right? And why don't we ask questions more, I guess?
Yeah. And sometimes it's as easy as just saying, so what?
Yeah.
And it does make you think of, oh, well, I could actually expand on this, and this is why X channel is or isn't performing well. And you have the answer, you just sometimes don't think to give it.
Yeah. And that applies everywhere, except for sometimes with my wife. If I ask, tell me more, or why do you ask that question? It doesn't
Or
work.
saying so what there, then
Or
yes,
so
maybe
what, yeah.
that's a
Who
thing.
cares?
Yeah.
On the other side, what would you claim is as a weakness for you within a marketing function, within a leadership function? Sorry.
I would say that, and this has come with time, to be more comfortable to step back and give that autonomy to our team members and that trust. I think that even if I have made this brief 1,000 times before, and I know I can do it so quickly, but I'm trying to help build our new hire in a content marketing specialist role, to train her to create them herself and get comfy with them. Being patient to let her learn how to create, say, going with this example of these briefs, letting her understand areas, and I say her because we actually are just hiring. So and we are,
Okay.
it is a her that we're hiring.
It is a
for.
her.
Yeah.
You also hire men, I guess.
We do, but I just was about to send out the email for the position, but letting them know how they can improve, where they can improve versus just fixing it. And sometimes again, that comes down to that question piece of, I will, when I'm giving my notes and my revisions, rather than just retyping how I think it should be or where I know that it can be stronger, I ask a question of, let's think about this. How can we go more deep into what a brand would think about their content marketing strategy here? Or how can we think more about, how can we put ourselves in our audience's shoes and present them with more valuable information here? Even if I know the answer, or at least I think I know the answer, I like to leave it to them to try to answer it themselves. And before, I don't think I was as good at doing that because I was focused on speed. And again, with the startup note, sometimes speed isn't the best way to build a team and isn't the best way to produce quality work. So that's been something that I've really had to learn over time.
Well, it sounds like you can leverage one of your superpowers of asking questions to overcome that or continue overcoming that. I think it's something we all struggle with as leaders. Is there anything you can share with me that's a point of pride for you and your team recently? Maybe there's a campaign or something that you launched or a strategy that you've been able to crack through. What's something you can brag about a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that an exciting launch recently was our product team actually launched a feature called B2B Analytics for CoHost, which lets brands see what companies are listening to their podcast, which is a really powerful feature. And the marketing team, our entire team, did a really great job at presenting this in such an effective way to our audience. And we were able to time it perfectly with events that we were at and press releases that we had coming out, and new clients that we were onboarding. And they really looped in our entire network within the podcast industry to just blast it out to anyone and everyone in podcasting. And we saw a huge uptick from the marketing efforts that we produced, and very high performance for the launch of this feature, which we're all very proud of.
That's awesome. Not all campaigns or marketing efforts are a slam dunk or a home run or whatever. Is there anything that you can share as an example of something that didn't work? And more importantly than that, how did you and your team sort of rally around on the post-mortem of that to grow or improve?
Yeah, I would say that, I guess a campaign that we tried that did not work is we tried to create a video series that was all about featuring the take of creators in podcasting and brands in podcasting and the companies in podcasting. And it was a good idea, but I don't think we factored in the time that we were asking these people to dedicate to this campaign.
Right.
Therefore, it received pretty low submissions and not a lot of people participating. So we spent a lot of time prepping for this campaign and trying to develop it. And we did end up creating some content from it that we were happy with, but that was one that we did it once and then never again, even though we built it out to be a whole series that we'd run for years to come. And that was a big learning curve for us, was acknowledging that when you ask people to give you quite a bit of their time, that
Right.
you need a good ask and you need a good reason. And I don't think that the company was at a point where we had maybe the reputability that we do now, where people would be more willing to give that sort of content. So the team did our best at working with what we had. And I think that it did change our minds and shift how we think about creating campaigns like that down the road and making it as easy as we can for any user or any company or brand or creator to participate. And that is now our biggest focus. Even when we send out surveys for reports, it is barely ever you have to fill it out as just check the box or like multiple choice or anything like that, to try to make it as simple as possible for anyone to participate.
Yeah, and I really hope your message to those listening serves as sort of a permission to screw things up.
Yes.
A lot of those things that you developed or implemented post, may or may not have been even thought of had you not gone through that experience. So fail fast, fail often, and move on, right?
Exactly. And I think that that is the whole mandate behind our team as well, is that we are very comfy to try new campaigns, to experiment with new solutions, to test out different channels. And if they don't work, they don't work. That's fine. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's do a recap of why it didn't work. Let's not do it again in the future, and let's try something else. And we really like to give everyone on our team that confidence and comfort to approach us with new ideas that they want to test out. And that's also the fun of being especially for CoHost, it's a young product. So it's been a whole year of experimentation and learning more about our audience and more about our channels. And with that has come many, many failures, but also so many lessons and so much knowledge gained. So if we didn't take those chances, we wouldn't have learned anything, and we wouldn't have been able to get to where we are now.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to follow up one difficult question with another difficult question. And that is right now, April 20th, 2023, what is the biggest problem or challenge facing your team? And if you could just wave a magic wand, what would you fix or get out of the way of your guys' momentum?
Yeah, okay. I would say we have so many good ideas, and sometimes we are halted by the ability to produce them as fast as we want to. And that really spans across marketing as well as product. We, especially with product, it takes a long time to build features for a product, and our team is constantly brainstorming and pitching so many cool ideas that we know we can fulfill the podcast space and brands and agencies within the podcast space. But we also have to recognize that we don't want to absolutely overwhelm our developers and drown them in a sea of features that we know would be effective for them to create. So sometimes it's having that patience and working with what we have to date, and building out and following those roadmaps and those workflows, and having everyone really buy in and on board for that. But if I had a magic wand, I would wave it and implement all the features that we have in mind for really years to come, that we know can really solve some problems that we're seeing in this space.
No, that's a great reminder. With a good team, with an awesome product, with a conviction you have about your value prop to the market, how must it feel to not be able to get those all out into the market, those ideas, right?
Yeah, and our product team is a smaller team as well, since, again, like I said, it's a relatively new product. So just making sure we take it day by day and doing the best that we can.
Yeah, well, that's all you can do. How do you guys encourage collaboration and integration across the organization as a marketing function? Other departments, maybe the product department, maybe members of the C-suite. Do you do a lot of that, or what does collaboration or integration look like for you guys?
Yes, we actually work closely with all departments. So product, production, sales, obviously everything, even C-suite as well. So on the product front, we are constantly talking to the product team about obviously new features that are coming out, but also going to them about what are some pain points that customers have been saying to you that we can maybe leverage. What's the language that they use? Send us some recaps of the demos that you've done of the product, and let's watch back on those and see how these customers and brands and agencies are acting on them, how they're thinking about podcasting, what they're saying about the product, and let's leverage that. So we definitely go to product a lot for some of those insights on just how CoHost is performing in this space.
Right.
And then also on the production front, we like to do something similar with them, but just on the agency side, since of course we have the two companies running. So understanding a bit more about what these clients are looking for and what these enterprise level brands are asking for when it comes to podcasting. What is the education piece that they are maybe still looking for, whether it's not to just learn what a branded podcast is, but are they more focused on how they can implement it better into their marketing strategy? Is it about how they can communicate the performance of the podcast to their leadership? And can we provide them with resources to help them along that way? So with our own knowledge of our audience and our space, I like to really bring in bits and pieces from the teams there too. And then as for collaboration, we like to do collaborative articles and content pieces that bring in the other team members, always keeping everyone up to date on where the product is, or where the marketing team is at, what we have going on, how it's performing. And then as for C-suite, we do bring in, especially our CEO, quite often to do any sort of press or PR or write features for her for the website as well. So we really like to loop her in for those circumstances.
Oh, that's great. At different stages of your funnel on either side of the either company, besides some of the obvious KPIs, are there any unique things that you as a team hang your hat on as a North Star at different stages of the funnel? What do you track regularly that may be not as traditional as like CPM or reach or whatever?
Yeah, I would say, let's see. Trying to think of what would be outside of the box.
And if they're traditional, that's fine. Which ones do you hold most important, I think, in terms of defining success or failure of an effort?
Yeah, so I would say if we're looking at a channel and measuring the performance of a channel, and dependent on the goal that we set out for it, but say it is for conversions, then obviously SQLs are our biggest driver and what we're looking at the most. So this is once we have qualified, obviously, the lead for sales. And we identify this by having the initial touch point with them and the initial conversation with them to move them on to a proposal for the agency for Quill. So that's how we qualify for SQLs. And that would be I would say our main metric that we're looking at.
I'm glad you answered that, because one of the things I'm trying to communicate often is that the marketing function needs to fulfill a business case, right? And so there's a lot of teams, I think, sometimes that are putting too much emphasis on things that are important from a KPI standpoint, but they're not congruent with the ultimate business case. And so when you're prioritizing things like real good qualified leads and tracking the feedback in terms of do those convert, and then making decisions to the marketing system based on that, I want to be an advocate of that type of thinking more. And so thank you for doubling down on that or helping emphasize that.
And I think to even further that, then a good example is that marketing, we had a Google Ads campaign running that was bringing in quite a few MQLs, so marketing qualified leads. And for marketing, it would look great. For us, it looked awesome. Our conversion rates were high, our CPC was low. It was overall, when you first look at it, a great campaign. But when we dove deeper, very few of those MQLs moved to an SQL stage. So once it came to sales, it looked like sales wasn't performing as well. But for us, we're like, oh, this campaign is running great. Look at all these MQLs. But when you look further and you ask those questions, you see that we were actually going after some keywords that were bringing more unqualified leads into our pipeline because they were looking for maybe services that we didn't offer. They were looking for more of like a freelancer type of collaboration, which is not what we offer. We only do full service. So by asking those questions and by taking that step back and understanding how marketing is contributing to the overall sales process, this campaign wasn't performing well. And it did result in us taking it out, shutting it down, and moving focus to some campaigns that maybe brought in less MQLs, but more qualified MQLs that would move on to that SQL process, which then would result in converted clients, which can be attributed to both marketing and sales then. So I think that, to your point of what you're saying, is understanding how marketing efforts are contributing to sales. And this just echoes the conversation of why marketing and sales need to be so closely tied. It is really something that you need to be looking at and focusing on, because you can't just look at that one metric of, oh, these MQLs are coming in. Well, let's look further and let's ask more questions. These MQLs aren't qualified. So it's not a win.
Totally. Well, you've just described it better than I could describe it. So mission accomplished. Thank you for sharing that. How do you manage conflicts or disagreements internally? High functioning teams have lots of conflict and disagreement. So what's your blueprint for that?
I would say that, just on a personal note, of whenever I know I'm maybe disagreeing with an opinion or even giving constructive criticism or whatever it may be, I think coming at it from a place of, and I think it's hard to say, take emotions out of it, because no matter what, you're going to have some sense of emotion involved. Whether or not you're effective at fully removing it or not, I think is a whole other question. But I would say that I recognize that emotion is involved. So obviously not being aggressive or rude when you are disagreeing or when you are giving constructive criticism or feedback, but also being more straightforward with it, recognizing where their opinions and thoughts might have come from. Maybe you can tie those in somehow. And then I think that overall, having a full team discussion with it, so it's not just either you and someone else going back and forth and
Yeah.
never coming to a conclusion. Bring in another party that can also contribute, because I think that can often happen where if it is just you and one other person and you're just going back and forth, you somehow get so into it that if you took a step back and just looked at it, you'd see that it wasn't even a big discussion, or you and
Right.
that person are maybe going after the same thing. So bringing in someone else to contribute to that conversation as well can be an effective strategy, I found.
Totally.
And we like to also hold quite a few brainstorming sessions. So any of these disagreements or thoughts or discussions can come out then. And it's a whole collaborative team process of walking through them.
Yeah.
But I guess to also, like, a final cherry on top for that is just make people feel heard and don't ignore what they've said and
Yeah.
their different thoughts or opinions or how they think something should play out.
Yeah. Yeah. Those perspectives are what make the magic happen. So they should be celebrated, right?
Yes,
Different.
definitely.
On the topic of when in scenarios where you're working with external partners, what is your recipe for success in creating the most harmonious and effective relationship with those people that don't spend their day-to-day living and breathing what you're doing at Quill? What's your approach to that? Because it's a big topic for lots of leaders.
Yeah, so I take a lot of time prepping the brief before I even talk to any sort of vendors or freelancers. And why I like to do that and why I dedicate quite a bit of time to this is I want to set their expectations, but I also want to better uncover my expectations. Because I have found that in previous experiences, maybe I went into a vendor relationship and I didn't have those expectations set out because maybe I didn't know as much as to what I was looking for it. And that caused not the best partnership to flourish from that because they didn't know what I wanted from them and I didn't know what I was expecting from them until it was already running and going. And I was like, oh, this isn't it. So I think that creating that brief for myself as well as them before even starting that relationship is key. And then from there, I do spend a lot of time in that interview process of selecting vendors or freelancers to really run through any scenario that I think might come about. And this does come from experience as well of I have experience working with vendors, I have experience working with freelancers. So I know for me personally what I like and what I don't like, and how I work well with them and some characteristics that might not match or some experiences that might not match. And I do really leverage those in that interview process. In my experience with working with vendors, if I am working with a vendor that some part of their position has to do on reporting, I know that when I receive a report from them, going back to that data storytelling note, I don't want to just see numbers on a page. I want them to tell me what those numbers mean. I want to receive the story behind those numbers. What do they mean? What is it telling us? Is this channel effective? Is it not? Do we need to shift strategies? Tell me the story behind those numbers. And for other companies, maybe they don't need that as much. And that is now something I know about myself. When I speak to a vendor that is going to be working on reporting, this is what I expect. And it's not fair for me to not tell them that and then them not provide it and then me be frustrated that it's not being provided. So I think understanding you as someone hiring the vendor is very important. And then that also comes back to why the brief at the very beginning is so important. So I would say it all starts from the beginning.
Well, that's great. I mean, you're demonstrating such a great example of how you personally, Alison, can be the facilitator of good relationships, right? Whereas so many times it's just maybe it not as thorough or calculated in terms of jumping into these things. So that's a great reminder. I'm going to leave you with one last question. We could talk for a long time, but I want to leave you with one question about how do you personally sharpen your own sword or contribute to your ongoing growth and learning as a marketer, but a leader of people be?
So I am a big newsletter lover. My inbox is overwhelmingly just newsletters typically, and yes, it makes it very chaotic to wake up in the morning and start work, but I would say that I really love gaining insights and understanding and knowledge from experts within the industry, and hearing their takes on newsletters. And I subscribe to really anything and everything that has to do with marketing and all different areas of marketing, including management and leadership as well. So I would say that newsletters are a big one for me. I'm also a part of quite a few Slack communities that I like to gather insights on, and hear about other people's experiences. I'm probably a part of some that I should not be a part of because it doesn't really have to do with my job. But again, I love to grab experiences from all walks of life. And then I also stay relevant on LinkedIn and Twitter. Even if I'm not as active, I do follow quite a few people there because I think that those short snippets of insights and experiences and stories are such a valuable way to make yourself think a little differently and also stay up to date with trends that are happening in the space.
Yeah, those are some great examples. I'm also a newsletter, although I create a different email address for my.
I really should do that. Yeah.
Finally, what, like for brands that are serious about weaving podcast into their mix, I'm assuming it's a pretty easy sort of navigation to your site user journey through having an exploration. But what do these brands do next if they're interested?
Yeah, if they're interested, it would just be going to our website at quillpodcasting.com. And then we have a demo or a lead form there that you can contact us, and we'll get in touch and chat about what you're looking to create.
Awesome. Well, I learned a lot. I appreciate your time, and thanks for contributing with your experiences and again, blueprint for success in these different areas. I love talking to you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's fun to be on the other side of podcasting.
Yeah, I bet. Take care, Alison. Thank you.
Thanks. You too.